Hi everybody, this is Nicola Metulef reporting from Chile. So if you guys can see behind me, which you can't because it's dark now, but about half hour ago was actually pretty nice and you could see the outside of Chile, well what is Chile, but not anymore, so you're a loss, yeah. Anyways, let's go into our session. So my name is Nicola Metulef. I am Windows 8 evangelist from Microsoft Corporate, and I'm here in Chile to help out for WOWZAPP, which will start tomorrow morning. So I'm very excited to be here and to be part of this amazing global hackathon. Today I'll be talking about data binding with the XAML controls, and it's a topic that I think it's very important for anybody starting with Windows 8 apps and developing in C# and XAML, and it's something that would actually help out with your code and save you a lot of time. So it's definitely something I want to talk about and share with you. So let's dive in. So what I want to do is I want to talk about what data binding is first. So what we can do is data binding is a very simple way to interact with data. What you can do is you can bound UI elements to your data model, your data objects, so they can talk to each other and they can modify each other with minimal amount of logic. So what this does is this allows you to actually focus on your application and what you want to do with your application rather than actually focusing on how to do it. So what happens with data binding is you have your source, which is typically your data model or your object, and then you have your target, which could be a UI element like a text box. And then you can hook up properties from your data model to your target, so as the source changes, your UI element updates automatically, or as your target changes, your data model updates automatically, and that's all taken care of by the binding engine inside of XAML and Windows 8. So what we're going to do right now is we're actually going to build an app together. So I have this idea for an app. I'm going to run it for you real quick. And if it shows up, so basically it's just a simple idea is I have a lot of employees that I want to keep track of. And if you can see, the app is split into two halves. The first half is a list of all my employees, and I can click through them. And the second half is just the details of each employee. So I have their name, their title, email, and it's a text box, so I can change the data if I want to. Okay? So right now this is just a static data, so I can't really, I can't do anything right now. So what we're going to do, we're going to implement all the functionality so we're able to select different users, different employees, and actually change their data and view their data. So what we're going to do is, let me go back to my Visual Studio and let me show you what I have in my project. So this is just a brand new project. All I have is static XAML data that shows off a grid, which is split in two, just the left side, which has the list view, and the right side, which has all the controls, all the properties, the text boxes and text blocks. So very simple. So what we're going to start with, simple data binding to some of the text boxes. So what I want to do is I want to have, let's say, an employee, and I want to be able to bind his or her name, and their title, and their name. So the way we're going to do this is first we have to create a data model. So we have to create a class, and we call this employee. So this is just a sample class. And this class will have properties. So in this case, it has two properties, employee name and employee title, and then has a very simple constructor which basically initializes these properties. And then what we can do, in our XAML file, we can define text blocks or any other URL element, and what we can do, we can actually set the text to be equal to be binded to the properties of this employee. And how are we going to do this? So if you notice, my text blocks here are in a stack panel, and this stack panel has a name, and this name allows me to actually reference it in my XAML.cs file. So if I go into my XAML.cs file, I can actually create the employee, so I can just create a new employee, an object, give it a name, a title, and then I can say I want to set the data context of my stack panel, which is the stack panel that contains my text blocks, to an employee. Now what data context does is just sets the reference to an object or data model to be referenced in my XAML file. And the nice thing about data context, I can actually set the data context to the entire page, and it will propagate down to all its children, so all the children will get the same data context unless specified otherwise, unless specified with a different data context. So in this case, I set the data context to my employee, and I can bind the employee name to the text block, the first text block to the property employee name, and I can bind the second text block to the property employee title. And this is just a very simple way to connect your data model to your elements without actually writing any very complicated code. So let's go ahead and do that real quick in our application. So I'm going to go back to my Visual Studio, and I'm just going to create a simple class called employee. Give it a real name. Okay. Pop up. And then I can just add some properties and a constructor. So right now, I have a name, a title, an email, which are all strings, and then I have a datetime object hired, which is also a property, and it's gonna serve as the date that the person was hired. And then I have a very simple constructor that initializes the 4 properties. Great. Now what we can do, if we go to our main page, XAML.cs, I can simply in our onNavigated_to method, and this method gets executed each time we navigate to this page. What we do is we can just set the data context of our entire page to a new employee that we just created. So we can say this.data context, and that sets the data context for the whole page and sets it to a new employee with these properties. And then remember, when you set the data context to the parent, all the children get the same data context. So everything on this page will have the data context of this new employee. And because I've done this, I can go into my XAML file, and where I'm defining my text boxes and my text blocks with the data, I can simply just bind them to the properties I want. So for this first one, I can just bind it to the name property. And then the title text box, I can bind it to the title property. And same goes with the email. And finally, the datetime object hired. And I'm also going to bind the title of our properties to the name, so each time, so that the title on top is basically the employee's name, which is up here. So I have 2 UI elements, they're binded to the same property of the same object. So if I go ahead and run this program, we can see that our controls actually got populated with the information we gave our new employee. So we have the name to be Matthew, which is the name we give our employee, and all the other properties are also from those properties. Now, what is cool about this, if I can actually edit the data, but right now it doesn't really change the information, the data model. It just changes the text box. So what I want to do is actually change the data model when I change the text box. I'll change the data in the text box. So before we do that, we actually have to talk about how to do that. So in XAML, there's several ways to actually do binding of data. So you can have a one-time binding, which the first time you bind it, and then after that, each time you change the source or the target, they don't get updated. So if I change the source, the target does not get updated. If I change the target, the source doesn't get updated. I can also have a one-way binding, in which case, after I set the binding, each time I change the source, if let's say somebody changes the source in the background, or I change the source on a different page, my target element or my UI element will automatically get updated. So it would call to redraw and to update its information. Now what we want a two-way binding. In a two-way binding, each time we change the target, the source or the data model also gets updated, or data object gets updated. So let's say I change the name in the text box, the name will also get updated in my data model, and this is very helpful, since we don't really have to write any handlers to do this for us. It's all be handled by the binding engine. So how do we do this? First, we have to be able to notify our UI elements that the data somehow change. So, and we have a way to do that by using the iNotifyPropertyChange class. So what we need to do is our employee class, which has all our properties, we just have to extend it to use the iNotifyPropertyChange, and also we have to implement the event property changed and the method on property change. So what this event and this methods do, each time a property gets changed, the onPropertyChange method gets called, which raises the property changed event with the name of that property to let the element that's binded to it know, hey, this data change, go ahead and update. And to actually accomplish this, we have to change the setter of each of our properties to call the onPropertyChange method with the name of that property. So what we do is when we set the value of our property, we just call onPropertyChanged and the string of the value of the property name. So let's go ahead and do this in our application. So what I'm going to go back to my employee class, and I'm going to extend it to the iNotifyPropertyChange interface. And then I'm going to have to also resolve it so it uses the system component model namespace. And then I'm going to add the event property changed and the method on property changed. And then we have to update our properties to use the onPropertyChange method. So I'm going to go ahead and do that for each one of our properties. I already have the code for that. So if you can see here, each time we set the name, we call the onPropertyChange with the string name. So, and this raises the property change event. Go ahead and delete these guys. Okay. So what we're going to do next, we're going to go to our XAML file, and we just have to update our bindings with a really short string. We just have to change the mode to two-way. And the way we do that, we just do mode equals two-way. Very simple. I'm going to do that for the first three properties. And finally, the email. And then hopefully after we run this application, we'll be able to modify the data through our UI elements. So everything looks the same, but let's go ahead and delete the last name of Matthew. And then after I go there, okay, we see that our title actually changed, which was bounded to the same property of our employee. So this is very cool. So we learned how to do binding, and we learned how to do two-way binding. So let's go ahead and move on. One thing I want to do before we actually move on and update our list, I want to be able to actually format our date. So why does our date look the way it does? If we go back to our application to where we bind our date, we can see that we're actually binding our text property of the text block to an object of date time. And the binding engine is smart enough to call toString on this object to convert it to a string, but the toString method of date time returns this long string. And we don't really necessarily want the time, and we maybe want it into a different format. So what we need to do, we need to create a way to actually convert our data as it passes through to the binding engine. So what we can actually use a converter. So the way an I-value converter works is each time data passes through source to target or target through source, it passes through the value converter, which processes the data and creates the appropriate type and format for the target or the source. So to do this, it's very simple. We create a new class, and we extend I-value converter, and we have to implement two methods, the convert method and the convert back method. The convert method is used for when the source gets updated or the source gets changed, and then the data passes to the target, so it passes through the convert method to convert it so it can be used by the target property. And then the convert back method is used the other way around. When the target gets updated, it passes through the convert back method to get the data for the source object. So to use this in our XAML file, we first have to define it as a reference. So it's very easy to do, and if you don't have the page.resources tags in your XAML, you can just simply add them. And then inside you just add a local and the name of your class, and then you can just give it a key to reference it, and this key can be anything as long as it's unique. And then when we wanna use the converter, each time we do binding, we can simply just call the converter and the name of our key that we used in our resources. So I want to do that for our date real quick right now. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to add a new class, and I'm going to call this class converters. And the reason why is I like to keep all my converters in one file. Just an easy way to find them all instead of having multiple files for each converter. Okay, and then here I'm actually going to add my new class, and is going to call it a date converter. And as you notice, it extends the iValue converter. And to use the iValue converter, you have to use the windows.ui.xaml.data namespace. So I'm going to do that. And if you notice, we have the two methods. We have the convert method and the convert back method. So let's implement the convert method. So what we need to do in the convert method, we need to take a data object and actually output a string to be used in our text parameter for a text box or text block. So to do this, we simply get the data, the datetime object, and then we call the toString method with the specific format we want to be displayed on our page. And that in this case is this simple format. And you can find different formats for datetime if you just go and look up on the reference online. And then for the convert back, I'm just going to take the string that we get from our text block and then call the try_parse method on datetime to actually create a datetime object that I can return to give to our source. And then I'm going to go ahead and use this in my XAML file. So first I'm going to reference it in my resources. So I'm just going to go ahead and add it. So we call it date converter, and the key I call it date to string converter. Oops. And then we go ahead and we're going to use it when we bind our datetime object by simply just saying converter and then static resource, the name of our converter, which is date to string converter. So hopefully after we run the application, we're going to see a nicely formatted date. And there it goes, December 26, 2011. So that's a lot nicer to read than actually reading an array of numbers and characters. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on to actually implementing our list. In order to implement our list, we have to have some way a collection to keep our employees. So what we're going to do, we're actually going to use an observer collection. An observer collection is a simple list that implements the iNotify property changed and the iNotify collection changed classes, which allow it to notify when the collection has changed. So let's say some item moved in the collection or something got deleted. This will notify the binded target object and let them know so they can update their UI, remove and add elements as needed. So to do this, basically, let's say we have a list view, and you can use a list view, a grid view, anything that takes a collection or item source, and we can give it a name so we can reference it in our XAML.cs file. So what we can do is we create an observer collection of, let's say, employees, and then we add a few employees to our observer collection. We had here in this case we had 3 employees, and then simply we reference our list view. And then we set the item source to our observer collection. And this allows us to actually give our list view a collection to bind to its items, to its elements. So let's go ahead and implement this in our application. So I'm going to go back to my employee.cs, and I'm just going to add a simple static method that creates an observer collection and adds few employees to this observer collection and returns the observer collection. So I'm going to do that right now. So and I'm going to resolve it. So we use the system.collections.object model namespace. So we add these employees and we return the observer collection so we can be used in binding with an list view. So I'm going to go back to my XAML document, and actually I'm going to name my list view since I don't have a name, so I can reference it in my XAML.cs file. So I'm just simply going to call it a cool list view. It's a cool name. Okay, and then in my XAML.cs file, I'm simply going to say this dot cool list view, which is the name we just gave our list view, dot item source, which is the source for all the items in our list view, is equal to employee dot get employees, which returns an observer collection. Okay, and then if we run this, hopefully we'll see our list view being populated by those employees. Okay, great. Not so great. We actually get our employees, but unfortunately we only see myemployees.employee. Now the reason why this string is displayed is because our list view does not know how to display our elements, our employees. It simply calls the toString method of the employee object, and what we get is just myemployees.employee. So we need to teach our list view how to display our employees. So a simple way to do this is to actually use a data template. And a data template is just a simple way to tell our list view, say, this is the template I want you to use for each one of your elements. And in this case, we're going to have a simple 2 text blocks which bind to the specific property of each employee. So what we're going to do, we're going to have to go ahead and do that in our application. So I'm going to go back to my XAML file. In my list view, I'm actually going to delete all the static list view items since we're not using them anymore. And I'm simply going to add list view item template and assign it the data template, which has the 2 text blocks which bind to the name and title of each employee. So let's go ahead and run that. And voila, we have all our employees. So we have Julia Reynoso, who's a swishy hairdresser, which I use her about every week. It's pretty nice. I have a releaser of the hounds. I like that guy. He's kind of cool. Anyways, so we have all these employees, but our main functionality of application still is not there. Each time I select it, I want the properties of our data on our text box and text blocks on the right side to actually update so we can edit it or view our properties. So a very simple way to do this is to just simply say we want to set the data context of the right side to the selected item of the left side. And to do this, we can actually just use data binding to another XAML element in the same file. And the way to do this, we simply use the element name property of our binding. So let's go ahead and do that final step, and we should be set to go. So I'm going to stop this application right now, and I'm going to go back to the grid that encapsulates all my data boxes and data and all my text box and text blocks, and I'm simply going to send the data context to the selected item property of the element name cool list view. Okay, that's it. Now if you remember, the data context propagates down to all the children of the parent, so everything that's inside this grid will get the same data context as this grid. So we're going to go ahead and run this application. And then each time we select, we can actually see the data changing in our text box and text blocks, and we can actually change it. So let's upgrade Selena to a developer. Okay, so you notice that our actual item in our list view updated to developer. Let's change her last name. She just got married to Jones, and we can see that everything that was bounded to that property was updated in the UI. Okay, so we're done. So go ahead and I'm gonna have these slides available for you online on my blog, and my blog is at this address. And I hope I helped you out at your WOWZAPP application, and I hope you win and have a great day. Thank you.